Hello there, Star Wars fans, and welcome to another Rebelscum.com video. Today, we're going to be talking about the multiple timelines of Star Wars The Force Unleashed, which... Star Wars The Force Unleashed, that's such an awesome story in Star Wars. Unfortunately, none of the timelines are canon, but there is a canonical timeline to Star Wars The Force Unleashed, and I'll get into that here in a moment. Star Wars The Force Unleashed is a video game. It is a fantastic story. One of the best video games, arguably, of the mid-2000s era, and also one of the best Star Wars video games of all time. I mean, it is really highly held by the Star Wars fandom, especially the video game Star Wars fandom, and follows the storyline of the character Starkiller, who is Darth Vader's secret apprentice. So let's get right into the beginning of that. So it all starts with Starkiller's parents on Kashyyyk and Vader invading Kashyyyk with his Imperial assault force. While invading, Vader makes his way through lots of Wookiee warriors and eventually gets up to the hut where Galen Merrick's father is, well, staging his resistance against the Empire. Because post Order 66, he stayed behind on Kashyyyk and just kept on fighting the clones after, well, clones were trying to kill Jedi, right? So Vader kills his father, sees his son, notices he's very powerful in the Force, and decides to take him under his wing and train him himself, secretly. And by secretly, I mean the troopers and Imperial officer that were standing there next to Vader were quickly executed by Vader to help keep this child a secret, rather than keep them in line by fear. Maybe some loose lips would slip up eventually, because some feared the Emperor, of course, more than Vader. So Vader can't have that. We fast forward several years, and Starkiller now is a little bit all grown up. He has been training under Vader and has now been given his first test to go and kill the Jedi Rom Koda, who has been attacking various Imperial targets, shipyards, and factories in order to bait Vader out to kill Vader himself. Well, Vader's not taking the bait, and rather face Koda himself. He just sends Starkiller to do it. Starkiller defeats Koda over Nar Shaddaa and thinks that's the last of them. It's not, but thinks that's the last of them. Later on, Starkiller goes and attacks a few other Jedi targets that are rooted out from hiding. Casdan Paratus on Raxus Prime, Shaak Ti on Felucia, and after that, well, the Emperor's spies finally caught up to Starkiller, and Vader is forced to execute him in front of the Emperor in order to stay in the Emperor's somewhat good graces. Shortly after that, Starkiller is recovered out of the vacuum of space and brought aboard a medical starship, which is mysteriously destroyed after Starkiller escapes. Not long after that, Vader gives Starkiller the task of, look, we got to distract the Emperor. We're still going to overthrow him together, but we need you to go rally up some enemies of the Emperor and, you know, get his eyes off of us so we can take care of business. And then, of course, after Starkiller does that and finds Rom Koda still alive on Bespin, Vader, of course, betrays him, captures the Emperor's enemies, and says, look, Emperor, look at the good job I did for you. Oh, that guy's still alive. Yeah, we'll take care of him. And then we're on the Death Star. The Emperor is getting ready to execute his enemies that have all been captured by Vader, who is so loyal. And then Starkiller shows up to put a stop to it. So this is where we diverge in the timeline. This is at the end of the first main story of Star Wars The Force Unleashed, and Starkiller has a choice. He can either go save his friends and the newly starting to form rebellion from the Emperor himself, or he can give in to his anger and give in to revenge and go defeat Darth Vader for the final time. So at this point, the canonical ending to the non-canon story again of Star Wars The Force Unleashed is Starkiller going and saving his friends from the Emperor, and he nearly succeeds. He does succeed in saving his friends, but unfortunately, Starkiller is killed by the Emperor even though he puts it on the Emperor. I mean, you really do whoop the Emperor up pretty good. That's how the first game ends. And then sometime after that, we see the events of Star Wars The Force Unleashed 2. So Starkiller wakes up on a facility on Kamino, and Vader is training him once more. However, now he has 2 lightsabers, which that's really cool. And not getting into the gameplay mechanics too much, having Starkiller utilize 2 lightsabers, going from that transition of just 1, and of course using the backward hilt saber technique. Now he's doing that double-handed, which quite cool. Vader's telling him he's a clone and that he is the culmination of successes and moving past all the failures of his previous self, and he is ready for his final test. And his final test is he must kill the ones he loves in order to beat the original Starkiller, because again, he's told he's a clone, and move past and serve his master loyally and serve the greater good of the Empire. Well, he can't get past it. He can't get past the inherited memories of the original Starkiller, and he ends up lashing out against Vader, even though he's not really going to kill a copy of Juno Eclipse as his final test. He lashes out against Vader and escapes the clone facility and ends up going to seek out Rom Koda, Juno, and friends from the first game, now that he's alive and kicking again. Now, he does so. Vader hires Boba to go bring him back. She goes, finds the fleet that Juno is commanding with, and captures her with a detachment of a new type of Imperial force that we had not seen before, an experimental type called the Terror Troopers. And there's a few other things like a Terror Walker and a few little Terror droid, spider little droids that are really cool. And unfortunately, there's no merchandise for those. There's not really any other appearances for them either. And the Terror Walkers, some of the smaller ones, even resemble General Grievous a little bit, which I thought was very cool, a nice little touch, a nice little callback. Unfortunately, that is their only appearance in the timeline, in any Star Wars timeline, and they don't make any other appearances. After capturing Juno Eclipse, Boba helps Vader lure Starkiller back to Kamino, and then Starkiller faces off against Vader one last time on Kamino. And there are, in the midst of their battle, more clones in the cloning facility, and then, of course, Starkiller gets the best of Vader. Now, we're back again at the light side, dark side choice, which can diverge the timeline once more. Of course, the canonical ending for this game is the light side ending, where Starkiller decides to spare Vader, and at which point the Rebel Alliance takes Vader prisoner, and unfortunately, we don't really see what becomes of this. The last we see is Vader strapped down, heavily guarded by the Rebel Alliance, and taken away. And that's the end of Force Unleashed 2. That's the end of Force Unleashed. And then, of course, Starkiller is racked with the conflict of, am I or aren't I a clone? Now, he is a clone. It is my opinion that he is a clone, and we're going to get into that based off of the other timeline. So, before we get to that point in the Force Unleashed, we're going to rewind a little bit and go back to Star Wars The Force Unleashed 1's ending. We're going to go back to that alternate choice. And with that alternate choice, if you decide to give in to hate and defeat Vader once and for all, well, after you, of course, defeat Vader, then you are quickly defeated by the Emperor himself after seeing all of your friends killed and, of course, the future rebel leaders killed by the Emperor. You are experimented on, turned into a cyborg, and you are made the Emperor's new apprentice until the Emperor says he loses use of you and decides to dispose of you. That is very Sheev Palpatine. That makes sense. At which point, there is a diverge in the timeline, and in place of Vader, you have Starkiller commanding the Imperial forces on behalf of the Emperor, and you go into an alternate original trilogy, which is very cool. I really love how they explored that alternate what-if kind of scenario. So you have 2 playable bonus missions that follow this timeline. The first one being, of course, their version of A New Hope. And it starts off with, of course, the Tantive 4 and the Star Destroyer. However, we see the Tantive 4 being a smoldering wreck falling out of the hangar of the Star Destroyer, and Starkiller landing on Tatooine. So, landing on Tatooine, he is going to Jabba the Hutt's palace to see what kind of info Jabba and his spies may have gathered in regard to the 2 droids that have escaped the Tantive 4 just before its destruction. So, fighting through some Jawas, Starkiller makes his way to Jabba's palace and ends up forcibly doing so when the Hutt decides to change sides on Starkiller and, well, thinks he's more powerful. Starkiller gets inside. The Hutt ends up escaping, of course, but ends up facing off against Boba Fett while finding out where the droids really are. And he finds out that they were sold, and then, of course, they were sold to Luke's family and are making their escape on Mos Eisley. So, Starkiller quickly dispatches Boba Fett. So in this timeline, Boba Fett officially dies during the events of what would have been A New Hope at the hands of Starkiller. And then Starkiller makes his way over to Mos Eisley to stop the droids and Luke and Ben from escaping on the Millennium Falcon. So rather than everybody timely escape on the Falcon, Starkiller gets there just before they're about to launch, and Ben stays behind and duels it out with Starkiller. At which point, Starkiller not only kills Ben, he also ends up fighting his Force Ghost as well. Now, it's not entirely sure as whether Ben's Force Ghost actually dies or just gets defeated and has to reconstitute itself later on. But it's pretty cool to see that apparently Force Ghosts can duke it out, and you can defeat them, apparently. Even though you would think they would be much more powerful or impossible to stop, Starkiller finds a way. And that's pretty much the end of that. They escaped on the Falcon. Ben gets killed on Tatooine rather than on the Death Star, and that's the end of A New Hope. And apparently the Death Star gets destroyed because the next mission takes place on the invasion of Hoth during The Empire Strikes Back. And again, instead of Vader, of course, Starkiller is in his place. Now, we see Luke has been using the lightsaber a little bit more in training in the Force a little bit more, and he's trying to tote the Jedi ideals to Starkiller as he's on the run, of course, and stop Starkiller on Echo Base. But at the same time, he's also a little upset about Ben being killed. Now, fighting Starkiller, he gets defeated and quickly starts to unleash the Force a little bit himself and starts to become unhinged and give into his own hate. And the more and more he becomes unhinged, the more dark side power you kind of see Luke start to wield against Starkiller, including red Force lightning, which is very, very interesting. Now, upon defeating Luke and Han and Leia escaping in the Falcon once more, you kind of see the end of that timeline for now. We don't really get to go into the Return of the Jedi portion of what would be in this timeline. There is no conclusion to that for that timeline. It's kind of left up in the air as to whether or not the Endor bonus to the alternate timeline of Force Unleashed 2 is part of it or not, and I am of the opinion it isn't. So we're going to fast forward back up to the end of Force Unleashed 2. So, if you give in to your hate once more in the Force Unleashed 2 and you decide to defeat Vader once and for all on the Battle of Kamino, Starkiller, before he can deal the final blow, is killed by none other than Starkiller. So, this is the reason why Starkiller is in fact a clone. Vader had cloned Starkiller a multitude of times and was training various versions of Starkiller to get the correct version, or at least the version he wanted, which was this dark side version, which was successful at keeping the memories of the original Starkiller at bay and giving into his hatred and killing those who would stand in his way and stand in the way of the Empire. So that's what this Starkiller did. This Starkiller was successful in defeating all of that and was a successful agent of Vader. So it is implied that he does exist, of course, during the canonical good side ending of Star Wars The Force Unleashed 2, but was just given strict orders by Vader to keep his distance during their duel and not engage unless absolutely necessary. So for the dark side ending, where Starkiller decides to defeat Vader, he steps in and kills the playable Starkiller, which is in fact also a clone. One of the clones who couldn't get away from his former self's memories and couldn't get away from, well, true love and the good side of the Force. In the dark side ending, this Starkiller goes on to root out the other rebels, and there is another bonus story that takes place after this point in time, so after the point of The Force Unleashed 2, and goes on to the Battle of Endor. At this point, of course, the Emperor is still very much alive, but so is Darth Vader. So it does not follow the timeline of the first Star Wars The Force Unleashed dark side ending, because Vader's dead in that, and it does follow Vader, of course, still trying to keep his timing and kill the Emperor. So while during the Battle of Endor, Starkiller is fighting Rebel forces and ends up fighting a Jedi-trained Leia, which, of course, in this ending, Luke is dead at some point too, I assume somewhere during the Battle of Hoth again. So it somewhat keeps some of that timeline, but not quite. The details are just slightly shifted, it seems. Starkiller does, in fact, kill Leia, and after Leia is dead, Vader tries to assassinate the Emperor and fails to do so, at which point the Emperor sends his forces to kill Starkiller, and that's it. We don't see what happens after that. It's unfortunately very unfinished. Very unfinished. And hopefully we'll see the rest of The Force Unleashed for now, but officially there are technically 3 different timelines of Star Wars The Force Unleashed. There's the main timeline that goes Star Wars The Force Unleashed through the good side ending into Star Wars The Force Unleashed 2 and the good side ending of that. That is the main canonical timeline of this non-canon story, Star Wars The Force Unleashed. From the first game, you have the alternate timeline with the dark side ending that goes into the original trilogy. And from Star Wars The Force Unleashed 2, you have another alternate timeline that stems from that dark side ending as well. I know it might be a little bit confusing, but in all simplicity, that is the breakdown. That is how those timelines branch off. There are 2 separate branches to the sacred Force Unleashed timeline. And I hope this video helped break down Star Wars The Force Unleashed, help answer some questions that you might have had. And if you have questions, well, please leave them in the comments. And we love that interaction. So please ask us questions all that you like. If there's another timeline breakdown you would like us to do, please do so. Maybe you want to see us do a breakdown of the canonical timeline as it is currently right now at this very moment, because it is in itself very extensive. There's a lot of awesome stories and awesome parts of the canon timeline, and a lot of new stuff that is coming in that replaces, I know, some things in Legends. We do love Legends. We very much love Legends, but there are some things that are inspired by Legends that are in place of the timeline now, where we can talk about and show all the cool stuff there. So please give us that feedback. Please comment, please like, please subscribe, follow us on social media. And that's it for today, guys. So thank you so much for tuning into this Rebelscum.com video. We'll see you guys later. We'll see you another time. And may the Force be with all of you, you Rebel Scum.